When Sarah lands her dream job, she never expects her charismatic boss, Andrew, to turn her life into a nightmare. After trusting him with her entire life savings in a too-good-to-be-true investment scheme, she discovers Andrew isn't who he claims to be. When he vanishes, taking her money and countless others, Sarah spirals into despair before channeling her pain into a fierce determination for justice. But as she digs deeper, she uncovers a tangled web of lies, fraud, and powerful connections shielding Andrew, whose real name is Philip Davis. What begins as a quest for revenge turns into a dangerous game as Sarah faces threats, cover-ups, and betrayal at every turn. When she finally gets close enough to expose him, Sarah learns a shocking truth: Philip isn't just a con artist, he's a pawn in a much larger, more sinister operation. With her life in shambles and powerful enemies closing in, Sarah must decide how far she's willing to go to bring him, and the system protecting him, crashing down. What she uncovers changes everything in this gripping tale of revenge, deception, and scandal. 5 years ago, I thought I was living the dream. I had finally landed a job that seemed like the perfect fit, an up-and-coming boutique marketing firm with a tight-knit team and endless possibilities. It was the kind of company where the CEO didn't feel like some unreachable figure sitting in a high-rise office. Andrew, our boss, made us feel like we were part of something special, something big. He was young, sharp, and charming, the kind of person who could make you believe in his vision, even when the details felt a little blurry. From the beginning, Andrew had a way of making everyone in the office feel like family. He would take us out for happy hours, remember small details about our lives, and always frame his plans in a way that made us believe we were all in it together. He wasn't just a boss, he was a friend, or so we thought. I'll admit, I looked up to him. He was confident, successful, and charismatic, the kind of person who made you feel lucky just to be in the same room. Looking back, I realize how calculated it all was. The casual office vibe, the personal attention, the promises, it was all part of his plan to make us trust him completely. But at the time, I was blind to it. Like everyone else, I bought into the dream. I threw myself into my work, often staying late and taking on extra projects. I believed in what we were building, and more importantly, I believed in Andrew. About 2 years in, Andrew started talking about this exclusive investment opportunity he was offering to employees. He said it was a way for us to grow with the company, to build wealth together as the business expanded. I want my team to succeed, not just in their careers, but in their lives, he would say during meetings. This isn't just about money, it's about building something for your future. At first, I was skeptical. I didn't know much about investing, and the idea of handing over my hard-earned savings to my boss felt a little risky. But Andrew was persistent. He held one-on-one meetings with each of us, explaining the details and showing us spreadsheets that supposedly outlined the fund's incredible returns. He even shared stories of past employees who had cashed out for huge profits. The more you put in, the more you'll get out, he said with a smile. Trust me, this is the smartest move you'll ever make. And I did trust him. That was my first mistake. At the time, I had been saving for years to buy my first home. I had just over $150,000 in my savings account, a number I was incredibly proud of. But the housing market was insane, and every time I thought I was close to affording a decent place, prices seemed to jump higher. So when Andrew pitched his investment fund as a way to grow my money faster, it felt like the perfect solution. I could invest for a couple of years, let the returns build, and then have even more money to put toward my dream home. Andrew knew exactly how to play to my emotions. Sarah, you're one of the most dedicated people I've ever worked with, he told me during one of our conversations. I hate to see you stuck on the sidelines when you could be building something amazing. You deserve this. I handed over everything. Every penny of my savings. I still remember the nervous excitement I felt as I wrote the check and signed the paperwork. Andrew assured me it was the right decision, and I believed him. After all, he had never given me a reason not to. For a while, things seemed fine. Andrew would send out monthly updates on the fund's performance, complete with charts and graphs showing how much our investments were growing. I wasn't the only one who had bought in, almost everyone in the office had contributed something, from a few $1,000s to six-figure amounts like mine. The atmosphere at work was electric. We weren't just employees anymore, we were investors, partners in something bigger than ourselves. We would joke about what we were going to do with our future riches, planning vacations and upgrades to our lives. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things started to change. It began with small red flags, client projects that were delayed, payments from big accounts that didn't seem to come through. Andrew, who had once been so present and engaged with the team, started spending less time at the office. He would call in from his car or from some luxury resort, always claiming he was meeting potential clients or scouting opportunities for growth. At first, we didn't question it. He was the boss, after all, and he was always working on big-picture things we didn't fully understand. Then the paychecks started coming late. At first, it was just a day or two, but then it stretched to a week, sometimes more. When we asked Andrew about it, he would blame cash flow issues or delays with clients, always brushing it off as a temporary problem. "We're in a growth phase," he said. "These things happen. Don't worry, I've got it under control." But I was worried. Something didn't feel right, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I started asking Andrew about my investment, wanting to know how the fund was doing and when I could expect to see some returns. He would always smile and give me the same answer: "It's growing. Don't worry about it. You'll thank me when it's all said and done." The breaking point came one Monday morning when I showed up to the office to find it completely empty. The desks, the computers, even the artwork on the walls, everything was gone. At first, I thought there had been some kind of robbery, but the truth was much worse. Andrew had disappeared. No warning, no explanation, just vanished into thin air. Panic set in as I tried to call him, only to find that his number was disconnected. I called my co-workers, and one by one, we realized the extent of what had happened. Andrew hadn't just closed the office, he had emptied the company's bank accounts, leaving us with nothing. Worse, the investment fund we had all poured our money into. It didn't exist. It had never existed. I was in shock. My entire life savings, everything I had worked for, was gone. At first, I didn't even cry. I just sat there, staring at the blank screen of my phone, unable to process what had happened. How could someone I trusted so completely do something like this? How could I have been so blind? The days that followed were a blur of anger, confusion, and despair. I called the police, but they said it was a civil matter and directed me to file a lawsuit. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I called the SEC and the IRS, only to be told that these investigations take time, sometimes years. Meanwhile, my bills were piling up, and I had no way to pay them. The life I had worked so hard to build was crumbling around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But as the weeks went by, something inside me began to shift. The sadness and hopelessness that had consumed me started to harden into something else, something sharper, more focused. Anger. Pure, unrelenting anger. Andrew had stolen from me, lied to me, and ruined my life. And he had done it without a second thought, without an ounce of remorse. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. If the law wasn't going to help me, then I would help myself. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but one thing was certain: I was going to find Andrew, and I was going to make him pay. Finding Andrew wasn't going to be easy. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions and broken lives. But I wasn't starting from scratch. I knew the man, or at least, I thought I did. He had spent 2 years weaving himself into the fabric of our lives, telling us stories about his background, his goals, and his so-called vision. I was betting on the idea that some of those stories held pieces of the truth. All I had to do was pick them apart and figure out where the real Andrew was hiding. I started with social media. Andrew was the kind of person who loved being admired. His Instagram had been a shrine to his lifestyle, photos of luxury cars, exotic vacations, and expensive dinners. But now, the account was gone, wiped clean. His LinkedIn profile was also deactivated, along with the company's website. It was as if he had never existed. But I knew better. People like Andrew don't just disappear, they reinvent themselves. Somewhere out there, he was building a new life, and I was going to find it. The first breakthrough came when I remembered something Andrew had said during one of his many self-aggrandizing stories. He used to brag about a business he had started in his 20s, a tech company he claimed to have sold for millions. He loved to drop names of investors and clients he had worked with, painting a picture of himself as a brilliant entrepreneur. At the time, I had been too dazzled by his charisma to question it. But now, I saw it for what it was, a carefully crafted lie designed to inflate his ego and gain our trust. Still, it was a starting point. I spent hours combing through old business directories, searching for any record of the company he had mentioned. Eventually, I found it, an LLC registered under the name Dynamic Solutions. A quick search of public records revealed that the business had been dissolved years ago, but it wasn't the dead end I thought it would be. The name listed as the founder: Philip Davis. Philip Davis. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, but the more I dug, the more pieces began to fall into place. It turned out that Andrew wasn't Andrew at all. His real name was Philip Davis, and he had been using a fake identity for years. I found a handful of lawsuits filed against him under the name Philip Davis, all related to fraudulent business practices. It was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each discovery more rotten than the last. It turned out that Andrew, or Philip, had a history of scamming people. Before starting the marketing firm, he had run at least 3 other businesses, all of which ended in bankruptcy. Each time, he left behind a trail of unpaid employees, angry investors, and shattered lives. And each time, he managed to slip away before anyone could hold him accountable. This wasn't just some mistake or lapse in judgment. This was who he was. A predator. A thief. A con artist. And now that I knew his real name, I could finally start to track him down. The next step was finding out where he had gone. I knew he couldn't have gotten far. People like Andrew crave attention and power. He wasn't going to live quietly in some small town. He was probably already working on his next scam, using a new name and a new company to lure in his next victims. I needed to figure out what that was, and fast. I started reaching out to people who had crossed paths with him in the past. Former employees, ex-business partners, even his ex-wife. Most of them were hesitant to talk at first. Andrew, or Philip, had burned a lot of bridges, but he had also intimidated people into silence. It took time and persistence, but eventually, I started to piece together a clearer picture of his movements. One former employee told me about a luxury real estate project Philip had been involved in before he started the marketing firm. He had partnered with a wealthy developer to build high-end condos, but the deal had fallen apart when investors discovered that Philip had been inflating numbers and pocketing the difference. The project was never completed, and Philip disappeared shortly after. Another tip came from an ex-business partner who had sued Philip years ago over a failed investment scheme. He mentioned that Philip had a habit of using offshore accounts to hide his money, funneling funds through shell companies to make it harder for anyone to trace. It explained how he had been able to fund his extravagant lifestyle despite leaving behind a trail of financial disasters. But the real breakthrough came when I managed to track down his ex-wife, Laura. At first, she was hesitant to talk to me. "I don't want anything to do with him," she said when I called her. "That man ruined my life." "I understand," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "But he's still out there, hurting people. I need your help to stop him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she sighed. Fine. What do you want to know? Laura confirmed much of what I had already discovered, that Philip was a professional con artist who had spent years building and destroying businesses under different names. But she also gave me something I didn't expect, a possible location. He always talked about moving to Miami, she said. He loved the lifestyle there, the money, the parties, the people. It's exactly his kind of scene. Miami. It made sense. It was flashy, fast-paced, and full of opportunities for someone like Philip to blend in and start over. Armed with this new information, I turned my attention to the real estate market in Miami, searching for any signs of his involvement. It didn't take long to find something that caught my eye. There was a new luxury condo development being advertised online, complete with glossy promotional videos and promises of unparalleled sophistication. The company behind the project was called Horizon Ventures, and its CEO was listed as Anthony Reeves. The name didn't mean anything to me, but the face in the promotional video? It was Andrew. Or Philip. Or Anthony. Whatever he was calling himself now, it was definitely him. The video was sickening to watch. There he was, smiling and charming as ever, talking about his vision for the development and his commitment to excellence. It was the same act he had used on us, recycled and repackaged for a new audience. And once again, people were falling for it. I knew I couldn't let it happen. If he was running a scam, and I was sure he was, it was only a matter of time before more people lost their money, just like I had. I had to act fast, but I couldn't go to the authorities yet. I didn't have enough evidence to prove he was behind Horizon Ventures. If I wanted to stop him, I needed to get closer. I needed to gather proof. That's when I made the decision. I was going to Miami. Miami was everything I imagined it would be, hot, loud, and buzzing with energy at all hours of the day and night. The skyline was a patchwork of towering glass condos and cranes, the city constantly building itself up, reaching higher and higher. It was the perfect backdrop for someone like Philip, flashy, ambitious, and morally bankrupt. As I walked through the streets, I could almost feel him here, his presence lingering like a bad memory. Somewhere in this city, he was scheming, laughing, enjoying his ill-gotten wealth. I was going to make sure it all came crashing down. I didn't have much of a plan when I arrived, just a gut instinct that this was where I needed to be. My first stop was the Horizon Ventures office. I found the address on their website, a sleek downtown high-rise with tinted windows and a minimalist logo on the door. Inside, the office was just as polished, white walls, glass partitions, and expensive-looking furniture. It screamed wealth and success, but I knew better. It was a facade, just like everything else Philip had ever built. I posed as a potential buyer, walking into the office with a bright smile and feigned curiosity about the condo development. A receptionist greeted me warmly, offering me a glossy brochure and a bottle of water. "Are you interested in one of our penthouse units?" she asked, her tone practiced and professional. "They're selling fast." "I am," I lied, pretending to flip through the brochure. "But I'd really love to speak with the CEO. I heard he has such a unique vision for the project." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Mr. Reeves is very busy, but I'd be happy to connect you with one of our sales agents." I pressed her gently, playing the role of an eager but slightly entitled investor. "I just have a few questions I'd love to ask him personally. I'm looking to make a significant investment, and I prefer to deal with decision-makers directly." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Let me see if he's available." A few minutes later, I was ushered into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And there he was. Philip. Or Anthony, as he was calling himself now. He looked exactly the same, tailored suit, perfectly styled hair, and that smug, confident grin I'd come to hate. For a split second, I froze, every emotion I'd bottled up over the past year threatening to spill over. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Sarah, he said, extending his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you. I hear you're interested in our project. The fact that he didn't recognize me stung more than I expected. I had spent 2 years working for this man, giving him my loyalty, my trust, my money. And to him, I was just another face. Another mark. But I smiled and shook his hand, keeping my voice steady. Yes, I've heard amazing things about Horizon Ventures. I'm very impressed by what you've built here. He launched into his pitch, talking about the luxury amenities, the prime location, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be part of something extraordinary. It was the same routine he'd used back at the marketing firm, the same polished salesmanship that had convinced me to hand over my life savings. This time, I wasn't falling for it. I let him talk, nodding and asking questions, playing the part of the interested buyer. The longer I kept him talking, the more information I could gather. So, Anthony, I said casually, what inspired you to start Horizon Ventures? He hesitated for the briefest moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But then he recovered, launching into a story about his background in real estate development and his passion for creating beautiful spaces. It was all lies, of course, but I listened intently, committing every word to memory. The more details he gave me, the easier it would be to expose him later. By the end of the meeting, I had what I needed: confirmation that Philip Davis and Anthony Reeves were the same person, details about the condo project, and a general sense of how the scam worked. He was using investor money to fund the construction, promising massive returns once the units sold. But knowing Philip, I was certain he had no intention of finishing the project. He would siphon off as much money as he could, then disappear again, leaving behind a half-built development and a long list of victims. The thought made my blood boil, but I couldn't act impulsively. If I wanted to bring him down, I needed to be smart. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof that he was committing fraud. And I knew exactly where to start. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in the world of Horizon Ventures. I attended open houses, mingled with potential buyers, and even managed to strike up conversations with some of the sales agents. Most of them seemed genuinely excited about the project, completely unaware that they were working for a scam artist. But one agent, a young woman named Lily, seemed more guarded. "It's a great project," she said when I asked her about the company. "But, you know, every business has its challenges." "Challenges?" I pressed, trying to sound curious but not too pushy. She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's just, things aren't always what they seem. That's all I'm going to say." Her words sent a chill down my spine. It was a small crack, but it was enough to tell me that not everyone at Horizon Ventures was completely in the dark. I decided to keep an eye on Lily, hoping she might lead me to more information. Meanwhile, I started digging into the financials. It wasn't easy. Philip had gotten better at covering his tracks since his last scam. But he wasn't perfect. I found discrepancies in the public records for Horizon Ventures, small inconsistencies that hinted at something bigger. Payments that didn't add up, shell companies with vague names, and a suspicious lack of progress on the construction site. It was clear that money was disappearing, but I needed more concrete evidence. That's when I got lucky. Late one night, as I was scrolling through property records, I stumbled across a name I recognized: Laura Davis. Philip's ex-wife. One of the shell companies listed as a consultant on the Horizon Ventures project was registered in her name. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Philip was using her as part of his scheme, probably without her knowledge. I reached out to Laura again, this time with more urgency. When I explained what I had found, she was furious. "That son of a bitch," she muttered. "He promised me he was done with all of this." She agreed to meet me in person, and over coffee, she told me everything she knew. Philip had contacted her a few months earlier, claiming he wanted to make amends. He had convinced her to sign some documents, assuring her it was just a formality. "I should have known better," she said, shaking her head. "But he's so damn convincing. He makes you want to believe him." With Laura's help, I was able to connect the dots. Philip was funneling investor money through her shell company, then transferring it to offshore accounts. It was the same scheme he had used in the past, just with a new name and a new location. Now, I had the proof I needed. The final piece of the puzzle came when I managed to record one of my conversations with Philip. I posed as an investor again, asking pointed questions about the project's finances. He slipped up, admitting, off the record, he thought, that some of the funds were being redirected to cover operational costs. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough to show that something shady was happening. With everything I had gathered, I knew it was time to act. But I didn't just want to stop Philip, I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else, ever again. And to do that, I needed to go public. I had everything I needed. The evidence, the story, the perfect setup to expose Philip, Anthony, or whatever name he was going by this week. With every piece of information I had gathered, I crafted a comprehensive report detailing his fraudulent activities, complete with timelines, documents, and the damning recording of him slipping up. I sent copies to the SEC, the IRS, and several local news outlets in Miami. The net was closing in, and I could feel the finish line. This was it. Philip Davis was finally going to pay for what he had done. Or so I thought. 2 weeks after I sent out the information, I got a call from one of the reporters I'd contacted. He wanted to meet in person to discuss the story. I agreed, eager to see how this would all unfold in the public eye. We met at a small cafe downtown, where he laid his phone on the table and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sarah," he said, lowering his voice. "We've been looking into Philip Davis, or Anthony Reeves, I should say. Your story checks out. But, there's something else you need to know." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" The reporter hesitated for a moment, as if he were debating whether or not to tell me. Finally, he leaned in and said, "Philip Davis isn't just a con artist. He's protected." "Protected?" I repeated, confused. "By who?" "By some very powerful people," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We dug into Horizon Ventures, and it's not just a scam. It's a front, a way to launder money for some big players in the real estate and finance industries. And Philip? He's just the middleman." I stared at him, my heart racing. This wasn't what I had expected. I had been so focused on taking down Philip that I hadn't even considered the possibility that he was just a cog in a much larger machine. The reporter continued, "The reason he's been able to evade the law for so long is because he's useful to people who operate above the law. If you push too hard on this, you're not just going to make enemies with Philip. You're going to make enemies with people who can destroy your life." I sat back in my chair, trying to process what he was saying. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but deep down, I knew he was right. Philip's scams had always been too big, too brazen to be the work of just one man. Of course he had help. Of course there were people protecting him. But knowing that didn't make me want to stop. If anything, it made me even more determined. "I don't care," I said, my voice steady. "He stole everything from me. From so many people. I'm not backing down." The reporter gave me a sad smile. "I admire your courage. But just, be careful. You're playing with fire." Over the next few days, things started to spiral. The news outlets I had sent the story to suddenly went silent. The SEC and IRS stopped returning my calls. It was as if every door I tried to open was being slammed shut in my face. And then, the threats started. At first, they were subtle. An unmarked envelope left on my doorstep with a single typed note, "Stop digging." My landlord called me, saying someone had inquired about my lease, asking strange questions about my background. Then my phone started buzzing with anonymous calls, the person on the other end breathing heavily before hanging up. I knew exactly what was happening. Philip, or the people he worked for, were trying to scare me off. But I didn't scare easily. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront Philip directly. I knew it was risky, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to let him win. I waited outside the Horizon Ventures office, watching as employees filtered out at the end of the day. Finally, I saw him. He was laughing with one of his sales agents, completely oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. "Philip!" I called out, stepping into his path. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me. For a moment, he said nothing, his expression carefully neutral. Then, he gave me that same fake smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Sarah," he said smoothly. "What a surprise. What brings you here?" "You know exactly why I'm here," I shot back. "It's over, Philip. I've exposed everything. The scams, the money laundering, all of it. You're done." His smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider. "Is that so?" he said, his tone almost amused. "You think you've won?" I stepped closer, glaring at him. "I don't think. I know." For the first time, his mask slipped. His smile faded, replaced by something darker, more menacing. He leaned in, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You don't know anything, Sarah. You think you've uncovered the truth, but you're just scratching the surface. If you had any idea who you were dealing with, you'd run. But it's too late for that now, isn't it?" Before I could respond, he straightened up, his expression once again unreadable. "Good luck, Sarah," he said, walking away without another word. The next morning, everything fell apart. My bank account was frozen. When I called the bank, they claimed it was due to suspicious activity, but I knew better. My landlord served me an eviction notice, claiming I had violated the terms of my lease. My credit score plummeted overnight, the result of fraudulent charges that I had no way of disputing. And then, the final blow, I was fired from my job. My boss said it was due to downsizing, but the way he avoided my eyes told me the real reason. Someone had gotten to him. Philip, or the people he worked for, had destroyed my life. Again. For days, I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by eviction notices and unpaid bills, trying to figure out what to do next. I had lost everything, and this time, there was no coming back. Philip had won. Or so he thought. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I realized something. Philip had spent his entire life running from his mistakes, hiding behind fake names and powerful connections. But in doing so, he had left behind a trail, a messy, tangled web of lies and half-truths that he could never fully erase. If I couldn't bring him down through the legal system, I would bring him down another way. I took everything I had, the documents, the recordings, the photos, and created an anonymous website exposing Philip and his entire operation. I uploaded everything, his aliases, his scams, the victims he had left in his wake. I even included the names of some of the powerful people who had protected him, careful to redact anything that could get me killed. Within hours, the site went viral. People started coming forward with their own stories, sharing evidence and adding to the growing pile of dirt on Philip Davis. It wasn't the victory I had imagined, but it was something. For the first time, Philip couldn't hide. His face was everywhere, his name splashed across headlines and social media posts. Investors pulled out of Horizon Ventures, and the condo project came to a screeching halt. Lawsuits flooded in, and even some of his powerful allies began to distance themselves, unwilling to go down with him. As for me, I disappeared. I had learned my lesson. Philip might go down, but the people behind him were still out there, and I wasn't going to give them another chance to ruin me. I left Miami, changed my name, and started over in a place where no one knew who I was. Philip Davis, or Anthony Reeves, or whoever he became next, might have won the battle, but I had won the war. His name was mud, his schemes exposed, his empire crumbling. He had spent his life running, and now, he would have to run again. But this time, there was nowhere left to hide.